One of the most common questions I get around the Pokemon trading card game is rotation. And today, I wanted to answer as many of your questions about rotation as I can in this one video. I'm Jet from inthirdperson.com. Make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and let's talk about Pokemon TCG Rotation and everything you need to know. Before we get to the rotation part, though, we have to do a little bit of setup here. And the first thing we're going to talk about is standard format. You're going to hear a lot of people talk about standard format. And basically, that is a mode of play in the Pokemon trading card game. It is, well, it's the standard, and it is pretty much the way the game is played everywhere on a competitive level. And it is a mode where it's only the last 2 or 3 years worth of cards that are legal in standard format. So if you're thinking you're going to show up to your local store tomorrow with a base set Charizard deck, no, that is not allowed. It's just the last 2 or 3 years worth of cards, which I will further explain the nuances of that in this video. If you're wondering which cards are standard legal, the best way to figure that out is to look at the bottom left-hand corner of your cards. You will see there on this Arceus V-Star, I've highlighted it, there's a letter F in a box, and that is the tournament marking, which determines like how old a card is. And as of this recording in September 2024, cards with the letters F, G, and H are legal for standard play. The rotation calendar in the Pokemon TCG usually starts between March and April of any given year. So right now we're in this first line here with that March, April 2024 to March, April 2025. And right now F, G, and H cards are legal. When the next rotation happens in March/April of 2025, then cards F will go away and we'll be introduced to a new card here in I. So it'll be GHI, and that cycle continues from year to year. So all the way to March/April of 2028, we can see the cards that will be legal will be I, J, and K. If there's any major changes between now and whenever there are major changes to this calendar or anything like that, I'll make a new video. But based on what we know so far, this is what the rotation calendar is going to look like for the foreseeable future. Tournament markings are relatively new in the Pokemon trading card game. Prior to the Sword and Shield era, there was no marking on the card. And if there isn't one, odds are that card is not legal for standard play. There are a handful of exceptions, which we will get to in a second, but generally speaking, if you don't see a tournament marking on that card, it's currently not legal for standard play. Cards get a specific marking generally from the year that they're released. So the F block cards came out in 2022, and those include cards from the sets Brilliant Stars, Astral Radiance, Pokemon Go, Lost Origin, and Crown Zenith. Now, Crown Zenith actually came out in 2023, but it's a reprint set based on cards from 2022. So that's why it will have cards with F, even though it technically came out in 2023, which is G. And that holds true for Paldean Fates and the upcoming 2025 special set, which hasn't been announced yet. But yeah, that's the general rule of thumb, is by year, but it's not perfect, and I'll show a hyper specific example of when this general rule of thumb falls apart. But generally speaking, you can use this. G cards were released in 2023. That includes Scarlet and Violet base set, Paldea Evolved, Obsidian Flames, Scarlet and Violet 151, Paradox Rift, and Paldean Fates. And then the H cards, those came out in 2024. That includes Temporal Forces, Twilight Masquerade, Shrouded Fable, Stellar Crown, Surging Sparks, which at the time of this recording isn't out yet, and then the 2025 special set, which hasn't been announced at this point in time. With all of that background out of the way, we can finally talk about rotation. It is a process that occurs once a year where the oldest block of cards, the oldest letter, is removed from standard format and a new letter is added. This is a process that some people don't like, especially if you play certain other card games. I believe Yu-Gi-Oh! Is a card game that does not have something like a rotation where just all cards stick around forever. But the Pokemon trading card game is one where the main format of playing is standard, where cards just go away after a couple of years. And the reason this happens is to help maintain a certain level of balance. It's much easier to balance the last 2 to 3 years worth of cards versus the last 25 plus years of cards. So the Pokemon company made that decision a long time ago that they were going to balance based on a very specific metagame with the most recent cards. It also helps the game explore new ideas without having to account for interactions with much older cards. There have been some fundamental rule changes to the game, like not being able to play a supporter on turn 1. Pokemon have gotten bigger. We've introduced multi-prize Pokemon, and a lot of these big fundamental shifts to the game would not be possible had there not been the standard format that's balancing around the most recent cards. So this helps keep the game fresh and exciting and lets the game go into new directions without being tied to design decisions made years, if not decades ago. And one of the great things about standard format is that it's a lot easier to get cards that are standard legal, because these are the sets that are the newest ones and the ones that Pokemon is actively printing and putting into stores. You don't necessarily have to worry about trying to track down a card released 15 years ago that is now super rare and really expensive in order to play the Pokemon trading card game. Odds are you can just go to a store and buy a pack and hope to pull that card, or just buy the singles for that card, which should be more readily available because they are new and in print. If you still want to use your older cards, there are other ways to play the Pokemon trading card game. The most notable is expanded format, where cards from the black and white era onwards can still be used in expanded format. Now, at the time of this recording, one of the big issues is that expanded format isn't properly supported in Pokemon TCG Live. It's been promised that eventually the game will be updated with real expanded format. I'm keeping my fingers crossed that it will happen sooner rather than later, but it's been a thing that they've promised for years and haven't delivered on at the time of this recording. So hopefully in the future you can play proper expanded format in Pokemon TCG Live, and if you can find tournaments in store or play tournaments with your friends or battle with your friends in expanded format, you can do that as well using your old cards. There are other formats that allow for older cards, such as Gym Leader Challenge, and if you want to know some other modes of play where older cards are supported, I would check out the Alternative Play Handbook. There's an official handbook where there's different ways you can use your Pokemon cards in different sort of games, and I will put the link, like you can see the link on the screen here, but I'll put the link in the description so you can go through and read all of the different ways you can play with your older cards. One of the reasons I was foggy about when rotation occurs is that it kind of depends from year to year, and it was especially murky in the last few years where the pandemic kind of changed the calendar. But at this point, we do have a set-ish schedule. At this point, rotation in Pokemon TCG Live happens in March, and it coincides with the release of an expansion set. So every year in March, there's a new set of cards that drop, and that is when rotation occurs in Pokemon TCG Live. For in-person play, the rotation is going to happen 2 weeks after the release of that March set. So if the cards are released at the beginning of March, 2 weeks later might still be the end of March. So it might be in March, it might be in April for in-person play. It really depends on the release date of that March set. So the general way to look at it is it's going to be March in Pokemon TCG Live, and then 2 weeks after the release of those March cards is when rotation will happen for in-person play. To help visualize this, I've made this rotation calendar, which is kind of a variation of what we showed before. So the rotation year, 2025, that's the one that's coming up next. That rotation will happen in Pokemon TCG Live in March of 2025, and then in person, it'll be 2 weeks after that. And the cards that are rotating in 2025 are all of the letter F cards, at which point the format after that rotation is going to be letters G, H, and I. And then in 2026, the G cards go away and the format is HIJ. And then the year after that will be H cards go away and it'll be I, J, and K. Today is not going to be the day where I go over the hundreds of cards that are rotating in the 2025 rotation, but I did want to highlight a couple of big cards that are going away in 2025, including Regidrago V-Star, which is one of the best decks right now. Palkia V-Star is a deck on the rise right now in Stellar Crown. Not sure where it's going to be months from now, but definitely seems to be having a resurgence of sorts. Arceus V-Star has kind of fallen by the wayside, but this is one of the best cards of its time and will be a notable loss to the format when it eventually goes away in a couple of months. And then Irida is like one of the best water support cards for pretty much any water deck, including Chien-Pao and Palkia. Again, I will do a video going over all of the meta relevant cards going away closer to that rotation date. In 2026, we're going to be saying goodbye to the likes of Charizard EX, Gardevoir EX, Miraidon, and Iono. Again, I will cover these in more detail when the time comes. So in early 2026, expect a video with a much bigger roundup of all the cards going away. And then in 2027, we've got Raging Bolt EX, Ogerpon, and Terapagos, as well as all of the Ace specs thus far. Not sure if Ace specs are going to be continued to be printed after 2024, but the 2024 crop of Ace specs will also go away in 2027. One question I get a lot is, can I use an older version of a modern card? And I think one of the biggest ones is Boss's Orders, where you can see the first printing of Boss's Orders has that D marking here. Shoutouts to Giovanni, my personal favorite Boss's Orders to put in every deck I play in. You can actually use this card even though D cards are obsolete, and the reason we can do that is because it is the exact same name and the exact same text. So they're both called Boss's Orders, and you can see that subtext under supporter on the left and the subtext under trainer on the right. They have different character names, but the card itself is named Boss's Orders, and then the text, switch one of your opponent's bench Pokemon to the active spot, is exactly the same. Therefore, the old versions of Boss's Orders are still legal and will always be legal as long as there is a legal version of Boss's Orders in the format. Here's a great example of a card with the same name, but it's not legal for standard format. So Pokemon Catcher on the right is perfectly legal for standard format. It's got the letter G. However, the card on the left has different text. On the right, you have to flip a coin. On the left, you just get to switch your opponent's active Pokemon with one on their bench. This one is not standard legal, doesn't have a tournament marking, and you can't use it as an alternative to the modern Pokemon Catcher because the text does not match, and therefore the card on the left is not legal for standard play. You might be sad to see certain cards go away, but sometimes older cards do come back. Now, this is mostly reserved for trainer cards, but they do come back from time to time. One of the modern examples here, Superior Energy Retrieval, was a card that was released over 10 years ago and rotated out of the format almost 10 years ago, and we recently got it back as part of Paldea Evolved. So there will be times where old cards come back as is. Some cards basically never go away, like Energy Search is one that has lived with the game for almost its entire existence, and there's pretty much just a reprint, a modern reprint every single time a new block of cards comes out so that Energy Search stays legal. In terms of Pokemon, they generally don't come back as is. However, a lot of the mechanics and the ideas of older cards do see new life in other Pokemon and other cards. For example, base set Blastoise with that Rain Dance ability is basically Baxcalibur's super cold ability in the modern game. So if there's a certain deck or certain mechanic that you really like, you might, and you're sad that it's going to go away, you might see it come back at some point in the future. Those are some of the most frequently asked questions I get about rotation, and I hope that I answered most of the big ones. If you've got any specific questions, please leave a comment below and I'll try my best to answer. But again, yeah, the rotation happens once a year. One block of cards, that letter falls off and a new one gets added. That's the general rule of thumb. We're going to be talking about the rotations for each year as time gets closer. So look around January, February of each year. You're going to see a big roundup from me where I cover every meta relevant card that is rotating and the ramifications and potential replacements for existing decks, or just cover decks that are completely going away because of rotation. So make sure to follow the YouTube channel here. thank you so much for watching. You can find me on all the things: YouTube, TikTok, Twitter, and Instagram at In Third Person. You can find me on Twitch at In Third Person, where I stream the Pokemon trading card game every Sunday at 10 a.m. Eastern Time. And check out the website, inthirdperson.com, for more articles and videos on video games, board games, and other nerdy pursuits. So until the next one, I'll see you later. Bye-bye.